part of our feelings of discouragement or guilt or overwhelm, all various degrees and kinds of feeling bad as moms is comes from comparison, which we get on overdose versions with social media.
We really do want to make our homeschool enjoyable for our kids. And I think one of the things that gets in the way of that is that as moms, I feel like we always are dealing with some sort of guilt. Like we just, it's so frustrating. I mean, we just feel like we're either messing everything up or at least messing up a good portion of it, because we're not teaching our kids what they need to learn, or they're behind, or we're not keeping up at the house, or, maybe we're burning dinner every night, which is what I do half the time. Good golly. Oh my goodness. The other day I was going to make a meatloaf. This was the most ridiculous thing. I have problems with meatloaf. I should not ever try to make it because I have ruined so many meatloaves, which is about the easiest thing you can make. But I was going to make this meatloaf, and my loaf pan, I was not able to use my loaf pan because it was doing some weird stuff. Anyway, so I looked up on Pinterest and it said that I could use my cast iron skillet. And I was like, that's a great idea. So my daughter made this delicious meatloaf recipe, and I was like, we're just going to put it in the cast iron. So I put it in cast iron, made it all pretty, and then I way overcooked it, and it literally turned into like a giant hamburger patty. Oh. It was not good. So my gracious husband, I think, ended up eating the whole thing. But I was like, oh goodness, how do you mess up meatloaf? That's me. I can do that. But we live with this guilt of just feeling like we're always messing stuff up. And I know some of that just comes from the enemy, that he wants to discourage us, and he wants us to feel like we're not doing it right. How have you handled that? You've graduated 2 of your 5, and you're on this mom homeschool journey. How have you dealt with that feeling of guilt?
Yeah, it gets so complicated because we are doing so much as moms, especially when we take on that responsibility of homeschooling. Like there was already the homemaking and the cooking and the laundry and growing babies.
Yeah.
Like that takes energy and,
right.
Pretty much everything out of our body.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we're also going to educate our children. And so part of it, I think part of our feelings of discouragement or guilt or overwhelm, all various degrees and kinds of feeling bad as moms is comes from comparison, which we get on overdose versions with social media, or even just when we are looking at other people where we only see a part of their life, which is all you're seeing on social media too. And we impose ideals on the photo, on the person, and think, okay, that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so we get these expectations or standards that are not the standards that God teaches us in his word.
Yeah.
And it's not what we're being called to do. But we think, well, cooking dinner means that every single meal is 100% homemade with organic, fresh ingredients. And all the time my home is supposed to look like
a model home.
Yeah, Joanna Gaines decorated
right.
it. And I'm supposed to give my kids the exact same kind of education as, the very best school.
Right.
And none of those are true. And so if those are the standards that we're measuring ourselves by, then we feel guilt because we aren't measuring up.
Right.
And so it's not even that we don't have guilt, because we do have true guilt. And so sometimes the false guilt that we have covers over the real guilt that we have when we're disobeying God and not trusting God. And if we peel away the layers of our false expectations and false standards and see, actually God cares less about the floor that needs to be mopped and more about the fact that I just snapped at my kids. or that I didn't deal with that sibling fight. I just, was the bigger person that smashed it down and stopped it without actually parenting. God's called me to parent and mother my kids, and that's bringing them up in the discipline, the discipleship that God's asking me to, that I'm never going to be able to do perfectly. Yeah. But when I actually fall short of God's standard, I can look to Christ because he has forgiveness for me and he has grace for me to keep going. And his perfection covers over my imperfection. But that's not true when you look at the false standards, the false expectations. No one's going to come in and whisk and make my house suddenly look like a magazine spread, like it was on HGTV. But when it comes to my guilt before my children, that's covered. And so when we start dealing with that real guilt and getting real grace to cover that and to move forward, the other stuff does just kind of fall away as we focus on what we're actually being called to do and where God's actually working in us. Yeah. The calling to motherhood at all, and especially to homeschooling, is not that we're going to offer this special gift to God of perfectly educated children, but that he's calling us on this journey and adventure where he's going to sanctify us and our children, that he's going to use our children for our good and us for our children's good. And we're going to mess things up, but God's going to make it right. And that's the story he's telling. So that's always the thread of hope every time we mess up. Yeah. God's going to draw good out of this. The good is our sanctification, calling us to himself.
Yeah. I love that so much because like we've talked about this many times, is that he then gets all the glory in the end.
Yes.
We get to just say, look what God did. We don't get to pat ourselves on the back and say, man, I was such an awesome homeschool mom. I was such a great wife. I was such a great homemaker. And it's hard to get rid of all of those feelings of guilt and feeling like we're always doing it wrong. But yes, if we're obeying the Lord and we're doing what he's called us to do and we're keeping our kids home and we're showing them Jesus, that is the most important things. Homeschool Insights is sponsored by CTC Math. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com and try it for free. For more great homeschool inspiration and resources, listen to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.